Freedom! Freedom!
To be Ghanaian on March the 6th, 1957, must have felt like you died and went to heaven. I try to imagine Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first leader, a strong prime minister. He fought for independence from Britain for years. He was a freedom fighter, a long-time resistor.
At long last, the battle has ended. And thus, Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever. And now, there is a new African in the world. That new African.
The British gave a speech at independence, and some of the Africans present took it as disrespect.
Ghana has chosen the path of democracy and has accepted the political values which we in this country hold dear.
They said they were proud of their former colony, like they helped them build a mature economy, like they brought the region more than war and poverty, like they never shipped Africans off the shore as property.
These people are trying to make us forget the past and deal with what's going on in this time frame, innit?
Kwame let it slide as he was sworn in solemnly, didn't even react to this pure dishonesty. For years he'd been playing the little colonial games, dressing like them, talking properly. He knew that colonial rule was all about land and labor, controlling it all. But the British couldn't extract their gold anymore. He planned to end that monopoly, and so many more. Nkrumah wasn't trying to chase away Western business. If anything, he was looking to open the door. But he wanted to upgrade Ghana's economy. He didn't want to be told what he's supposed to export. Now, what would it take to modernize Ghana when every other worker was a colonized farmer? These were the questions facing a nation in need of direction and decent investments. After his success in recent elections, Kwame had the benefit of people's affection.
We are awakening. We shall no more go back to sleep anymore.
Now with Russia to the east and America to the west, Nkrumah wasn't really leaning eastern or western. He believed it was best if Africa made its own path instead of appeasing the rest. America wasn't pleased. Its perspective was different. Either you're against them or with them. The US had a vision it was deeply invested in, so it sowed its seeds into everything. And by seeds, I mean whatever a country might need, always wrapped up as a nice deed. Emergency money delivered at a high speed, or military aid to make the other side bleed. But in the early days, things were cool. Both countries had broken free from English rule. The US had grown into a superpower, and Ghana's leader was known for speaking truth to power. When they broke bread, it was a new encounter. Both sides had the other's confidence, but that wouldn't last for long, because they had different plans for the African continent.
It is imperative that the international community protect the newly emerging nations of Africa from outside pressures that threaten their sovereign rights.
America's President Eisenhower tried to downplay Africa as a rising power. You might have heard about Africa's mineral wealth. If you could access that, would you limit yourself? The Western powers wouldn't. They wanted it all, so they had to keep African governments governable.
By the late 1950s, the struggle was taking on a racialized language. The rule of law against the rule of the jungle. the rational West against the global South with its emotional commitment to sovereignty.
See, Europe was in charge in the colonial era, but after the world wars, they couldn't hold it together. So it became America's moment to step up. If they didn't, they assumed the Soviet Union would become the dominant force in the motherland. But for Kwame, it was deeper, and he didn't expect America or Europe to understand. See, those guys craved Africa's natural wealth for things they wanted to manufacture and sell, meaning they needed Africans to stay in their lane and not establish themselves. Kwame wanted the opposite. He knew there was a food chain, and he knew who sat at the top of it. He knew Africans were at the bottom, and he knew the West didn't see this as a problem because it just made it easier to rob them. Nkrumah planned to expand Ghana's options because agriculture had the economy boxed in. He wanted to go from farms to factories because that would lead to enhanced capacities. In fact, the dream was to raise African standards of living. Many believed he had their ancestors with him. But no one starts off with a plan or a vision. So what's the origin story of this man on a mission? I remember growing up in Rafts, thinking education was my only shot. I remember going to a school out the ends. Kind of put me in a lonely spot. But I had to do what I had to do, and all them racial barriers didn't concern me. It's probably why I relate to Kwame and Nkrumah. I felt like we went on a similar journey. When Nkrumah was born, Ghana was called the Gold Coast, one of those spots where Europeans used to load boats full of gold and human beings. Locals sold those until the Europeans had all of them in a chokehold. Nkrumah, that's where him and his Marge lived. When he went to school, he was seen as a smart kid, showed the potential of a future leader, and by the age of 16, he was a student teacher. Soon enough, Kwame discovered the writings of Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois.
So for you to come together and give us a United States of Africa. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Made him analyze the condition of his people and reach the conclusion that we need a voice. He became a head teacher at the age of 24, but it wasn't just about education anymore. Nkrumah started getting into politics. Now let me ask you, when do you know that you're doing too much? Asking too much, complaining too much, pushing too much, or straining too much, tolerating and accommodating too much? Well, back in 1920, a group of Ghanaians said this is too much. Our lives are controlled by the British too much, and the colonial government doesn't do much. These guys were known as the National Congress of British West Africa, the NCBWA. They took a trip to the UK to raise awareness of what they had to say. But they were told they were doing too much, moving too fast, pursuing too much. Told that the British wouldn't loosen their clutch. If it did, it would look like they were losing their touch. The NCBWA went to the UK hoping to meet with the king. Couldn't even get a meeting with the Secretary of State, which was definitely a way of dashing their dreams in the bin. Bear in mind, this is 1920, meaning it happened when Kwame was young. By the time he was in his 20s himself, there wasn't much to show for how far they had come. When Nkrumah started getting into politics, the movement for liberation was heating up. Not just in Africa, African Americans, Caribbeans, and Asians all were speaking up. Eventually, he traveled to the States to expand his education and witnessed all the anger and the racism. Kwame was convinced he was seeing something. After that, he went for a PhD in London. But as a postgraduate student, Nkrumah was more focused on the Pan-African movement. His studies set him apart from the average black kid, but at the same time, he was mad distracted. See, a lot of smart people bury themselves in work, almost hiding, more comfortable with all the research and all the reading and all the writing. But Kwame Nkrumah, he was different. He preferred organizing. From the African Students Association of America and Canada to the 1944 Pan-African Conference, Nkrumah was obsessed with raising African consciousness, managing large groups, tackling hard truths. Divided we can't win, united we can't lose. Nkrumah's passion was organizing the grassroots. When he got to Britain, it was even more intense. Kwame soon made some important friends, future leaders from colonized nations, paving the path to decolonization. He went home after all them years abroad and started campaigning, gathering bare support for the freedom movement, but not on his own, because in the early days, he wasn't as known. He was under a political party called the UGCC, the United Gold Coast Convention. Even though he felt they were moving too slow, Kwame played his part and paid close attention. See, he had an activist mentality, and eventually, this would lead to loads of tension. See, Nkrumah wanted to see nothing but radical progress, but the UGCC holders preferred a gradual process.
Everyone that tries to be that person, they eliminate them. And it's a fact, like, it's black and white. We know every young black youth in the world know that if you try to do something positive and help black people, you're gonna dead.
Kwame brought tactics like boycotts and strikes. In his mind, Africans had no choice but to fight. He kept it non-violent to avoid loss of life, but his radical stance made him the voice of the times.
This mid-20th century is Africa's. This decade is the decade of African independence.
It didn't take him long to get arrested, though. The colonizers openly detested bro. And in 1948, they got nervous when Nkrumah was addressing some ex-servicemen.
At that time in the country, we were beginning to wake up.
Now, these were Africans that held it down in the war. They came home after fighting on Britain's behalf, and now they were poor, So they staged a protest, and racist oppressors didn't want to deal with the crowd anymore. So they shot at them, and bullets showered down, killing 3, hitting more. Riots kicked off. It was raw. The colonizers blamed Nkrumah and 5 senior members of the UGCC. They got locked up for about a month, but they were loved and respected throughout the country. Still, all this radicalism was way too much for the UGCC. Kwame broke away and formed the Convention People's Party, aka the CPP. Finally, Nkrumah had the freedom to take a radical message straight to the streets. This was different because groups like the UGCC had focused on educated elites. But those guys represented old times. Moderates were radicalizing, and Kwame appealed to both sides. The UGCC's slogan was self-government in the shortest possible time. Kwame's slogan was self-government now. And to many, that was the only logical line.
To independence. To independence now.
His party, the CPP, changed the tide, and it gained a following nationwide. People preferred the CPP's radicalism to the UGCC's gradualism, but the British saw Kwame's methods more than anything as an impediment to colonial capitalism. He kept calling strikes, they responded with violence and blamed it on him and dashed him in prison. Still, the people of Ghana started putting the British under pressure. Their freedom movement had already come together. The colonial government had to show progress to make sure the situation don't go left. They tried limiting it to a slow process, but the people fought for the right to vote, no less. They won the vote and the right to stand for election. Now this is what paved the way to independence. Nkrumah ran for office from a cell in the middle of a 3-year prison sentence. His party won by a landslide. The colonial government had its hands tied. When he left the jail, his head was held high, and the man was hailed as a legend worldwide. But for Africans in particular, Kwame Nkrumah represented self-pride.
We're getting older and it's not kids play anymore. Anyone that's got a kid is thinking like, yo, what kind of world is my child gonna be living in?
I hope you've had as much fun watching this video as I've had making this. So feel free to like and subscribe, comment your favorite bits, and sign up to the mailing list.